Hello, and welcome to the Sovereign Collective podcast, where we bring you real, raw truth for your self-empowerment. I'm your host, Sasha Calavoda, and I believe that you can stand on your own 2 feet, but that you don't have to do it alone. I love learning from people who continually strive to raise the bar, to go against mainstream thinking, and who dare to question the general consensus. People who risk being ridiculed or even risk the loss of their professional status as they bravely question the common narratives and challenge the rest of us to expand our minds and to reconsider what we think we already know. Join me in learning how to take control of your health and your mind so that you can have the energy to think more clearly and the confidence to step up and take responsibility for all aspects of your life. We promise to never censor here because I believe you are strong enough to hear the real, raw truth to make up your own mind. If you like what you find here at the Sovereign Collective podcast, then please share with your friends and family. I so appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in. And now, on to the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Sovereign Collective podcast. Today, I am joined once again by Tanya Verquin, the GNM extraordinaire woman out there. We are loving her, aren't we? We have done 2 episodes already with her. Number 64 is the intro to GNM, and number 66 is microbes, the idea of contagion, and giving a different perspective on that because it's an easy thing to believe, and it's what we've been told our whole lives, but is it true? So if you're curious about that, go to those 2 interviews first, especially number 64, because that's the intro to give you more of an understanding and a basis for what we're going to be talking about today and why this would all make sense today. So I have to admit something. This is take 2 of this interview. We did record this last week to find that at 7 minutes, I'd stopped the recording not to start it again. So we had a really great conversation for about an hour and a half last week that I hope to rehash today. So we're going to see what comes out of that. But it's going to be a great one. We're talking hormones today. It's going to be mostly, I think, on the female end, but men, we are going to touch on your stuff a little bit as well. But also, if you have a woman in your life who feels she is suffering from some kind of hormonal imbalances, this would be a great way to enlighten her as to there might be a different thing, something else going on. There might be another way to explain it and to go about resolving what is going on with her and give her insight. So Tanya, thank you for joining me again. I know this is going to be great because it was already great. And I really wanted to get into this topic because as I get to an age where things seem to be changing a little bit, I seem to be surrounded by more women who are in that stage. But also as women, we always know, somebody in their younger years or mid years or whatever who is, so they're suffering and they feel like their body is not. It's unfortunate because what I love about German medicine, it teaches us how our body helps us. It's working for us. It's not making mistakes. It's doing everything very intentionally because that's the grand design. But a lot of women feel like we're at war and we cut parts off and we suppress symptoms and we alter our natural hormonal cycles because it's inconvenient. There's so many different things about a woman's life that I hope through this conversation we can learn to embrace a little more and shed some light on a different perspective. So thank you for being with me again.
So happy to be here. Thanks, Sasha.
My pleasure. Okay, so we talked about hormones, and I want to talk first of all, your elevator speech on Germany medicine for people that aren't going to go back to the first one right away, because I know you'll want to after you listen to this if you don't right away. So your first elevator speech, and then we'll go into hormones.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, GNM or German New Medicine. We hear Germanic healing knowledge sometimes, but it's just a name for the biological laws of nature. And these are laws that we live under and that most of us don't realize. But they show us and teach us something completely different, 180-degree difference of what we're conventionally told about our bodies. So these laws they explain why symptoms are not looked at in terms of a malfunction, like you were saying, Sasha, or a dysfunction within the body, but as something very meaningful, something biologically purposeful. And it's always to help the organism, to help the person, to help the animal. It's never to go against them. So yeah, with this knowledge of the 5 biological laws, you really get an overall sense of, wow, my body is incredible. It's endowed with this wisdom that we can't even fathom. And then it brings back your trust. You lose the fear of symptoms and instead you ask different questions. Instead of what's wrong with me, you're asking, what did I just go through? What was that psychological, biological conflict? and you get some different answers, and it's always for your benefit. So it's really cool. It's a totally different approach to seeing your health.
Absolutely. And I love it. And I love that because you start asking questions and you get curious. You get to know yourself a little more. And you also, I think, become more present with the interactions of life and the body's expression. And it just richens the life as well, I feel, so many things to it. So thank you for that. Okay, so hormones. So one thing before we get into particular hormonal, I'm doing air quotes, people, for you that are listening, not watching on video. Um, Hormonal status is a thing we talk about. Well, we German medicine practitioners speak to is hormonal status, and where there's male hormonal status or female hormonal status. And I think for some people that's going to be a little bit confusing because they'll say, "Well, I'm a woman, I'm a man. What do you mean? I have a female expression of hormones when I'm a man? What does that mean, and what would cause a switch in hormonal status?"
Mhm. Yeah, being a woman and a man, we will have biologically necessity for having, like as a man would have more testosterone regularly, right? Normally, and a woman would normally have higher levels of estrogen. But our status, the status just means the levels of estrogen, the levels of testosterone, whether we're men and women.
Right.
Those can change, and this is what we call a hormone status. So, first of all, just backing up a bit, our hormone status really determines how we perceive the world around us, how we perceive our conflicts. So, a female, biologically born a female, she will have higher estrogen, and so she will view her world as a more inner territory. She'll be protective of the inner stuff. So that's exactly opposite for men who are all about the outer territory. So they're about establishing the outer territory, about protecting, providing for the territory. And so because we have such biological needs, this is why the hormone status is different. Now, what causes maybe a man's levels of testosterone to decrease or a woman's level of estrogen to decrease? There's a few different things. And naturally, anytime a woman is pregnant or nursing, her estrogen levels will decrease. So this is a natural thing. If a woman has suffered a loss conflict, the loss conflict is all about the ovaries, and ovaries is where the estrogen is produced. And so naturally, there will be a deficiency in estrogen if she has a loss conflict because the ovaries are impacted. If a woman is postmenopausal, this is totally normal. Her ovaries are not producing estrogen anymore, and so this is biologically normal. So there are times when we will, no matter what, whether we have conflicts or not, have a decreased level of estrogen. But when we're not speaking in terms of normal, biological reasons, we are talking about the territorial areas, and these are the territorial conflicts. So it's a very specific area in the brain that is controlled. It's called the temporal lobe, and it's just situated here in the temple area. It's a very small region, but this region is where the testosterone levels and the estrogen levels are controlled. So they're produced from the testicles and the ovaries, but the levels are controlled from these two brain areas. And this is where a person's hormone status can change, and when is having territorial conflicts. So the way we perceive them is going to be dependent on our hormone status in that moment of experiencing a conflict. So if you want, we can get into some examples.
Yeah,
Yeah,
please.
that's
Yes.
just kind of, yeah.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Okay. So for a female who has normal estrogen status, right? She hasn't had any conflicts yet in that temporal lobe. She's not postmenopausal. She's not on birth control because birth control would,
Mm.
make our estrogen levels go down. So she's got normal hormone status, more estrogen than testosterone. But the moment that that woman or child or a young girl experiences a conflict within that territorial lobe, we're talking about a scare fright conflict. We're talking about a sexual frustration conflict. We're talking about an identity conflict or a marking conflict. So remember the inner territory, okay? Anytime she has one of these, especially the sexual frustration conflict, this will impact her. This because we have to remember with GNM, and this is where we're going back to that first episode that we talked about. will make sense because we have a hammer focus that was impacted at the level of the brain at the moment that we have a conflict. So there's a measurable impact that is seen on a brain CT scan that is in a predetermined area. And so this target, it looks like a target ring formation. It would actually show up in the temporal lobe, precisely in that spot that controls the cervix and the coronary veins. And so what that does is that immediately decreases her estrogen levels in comparison to her testosterone levels now. And all of a sudden, she's viewing her world not from the female sense now, not about her inner territory, but now the more masculine territory. So she becomes manic. She becomes more like a man in that sense of she's watching out for the outer territory. So it's not that she changed, she's still biologically a female, but in terms of hormone status, relative to her estrogen levels, she now has higher testosterone levels. And so this is what happens. And in today's society, we have so many territorial conflicts. Just our society is built for conflicts. And so it's easy to experience these. And this is what will make like a girl a tomboy at an early age. All of a sudden, she was this girly girl and now she's going to school with like a backwards cap and she's got baggy jeans and she wants to play sports with the boys now. And this is the reason. It wouldn't be because, maybe her mom could have put her on contraceptives, right? But for the most part, a young girl who all of a sudden becomes a tomboy, this is why. It's because she experienced a sexual frustration conflict. Now, just a really tidbit here about a sexual frustration conflict. This doesn't mean it has to do with sex. This is
Right.
a biological conflict of not being protected as a female, as a girl. So this could be something as small as her mother and father get in a divorce and her father leaves, or her mom and her leave and she doesn't have that father figure, right? It doesn't have to be about sex itself. So it's important to distinguish that because then we can kind of look back and see, oh, I was kind of a tomboy. Okay, and then what was kind of going on? You can kind of connect those dots. You can kind of pick up what's been going on in your life. And then it's really neat. And there's nothing wrong with this either. Like there's nothing wrong that a girl would become a tomboy, for example. Like that's perfectly fine. It's just showing you why that happened and how.
Right. And so does the expression of a changed hormonal status, the outward expression of it change through the life cycle? Like,
Well, that depends on whether she has other conflicts in the territorial area. So if she has another territorial conflict, she won't perceive it now as like a female perspective. She'll perceive it as a male would because of her testosterone levels are higher, right, in comparison to her estrogen. And so she could experience like a territorial anger in a territorial loss or a territorial marking conflict. And that would then bring her testosterone levels down because she'd be impacting on the opposite side. I didn't explain this, but the testosterone, the male side is the right side of that cortical hemisphere, and the estrogen or female side is the left side. And
right.
so when that little girl or the young girl we were given an example of, when she experienced that first sexual frustration conflict, that would have closed that left side for hers. And now whatever conflict is next in that territory, it's going to impact on the male side. And that will again influence her estrogen or her hormone status again. So instead of having more testosterone, she actually it lowers the testosterone levels lower because it's impacting on that right side. So maybe now she's balanced. It all depends on the intensity of the conflict. But if it was kind of
Mm,
balancing it out, well, then she's gonna like kind of lose interest in the sports now. She's gonna kind of go back to hanging out with the girls. She's gonna be interested in what the girls are talking about. And this is how it's subtle it is. It's like she wants to all of a sudden dress more female again, like feminine again. And people are like, it's just age. It's just you're going through the
right.
changes. Well,
Phases.
this is why the changes are caused from the hormone levels. It's so incredible.
And so even though okay, so no, two things in that. So that would be, is that a constellation after the second one like that?
Yeah. So anytime we're dealing with two conflicts within the opposite brain hemispheres, that's
That's the
constellation. Yeah.
constellation. So this can get very confusing for a lot of people. Well, it just not for a lot of people, just in general. This is a study. This is, I feel, a lifelong study. It's good to know the basics, but one day I would really like to get to know it even more and more because there's so much to it and it can be so specific. Okay, so actually two more things in that. So how it affected her is that how does her handedness play a role in that?
Yeah, her handedness, that's a really good question. It plays a role in, so if it's different for right handed females and left-handed females, same with males. So being, let's say she was, that would have been a right-handed female, for example, where her first temporal lobe or conflict as a female with normal estrogen levels, that impacted on her left side, on the female side. But for a left-hander, it actually hops to the exact opposite side brain hemisphere and it impacts on the male side. And so instead of this girl's estrogen levels decreasing and making her, the testosterone levels being more prevalent, it's the opposite for a left-hander. So that woman or girl would actually have a lower testosterone even more, and her estrogen levels in relation to the testosterone would be higher. And so this is the girl that becomes really girly, ultra feminine. She's just all about being a woman, or for a young girl, all about the feminine stuff. She has no interest in sports, no interest in jeans or anything like that. So this is, that's very superficial examples there, but you get the idea. So
Yeah.
yes, it's different with lefties and righties. 60% of the population is right-handed and 40% is the
Okay.
left-handed.
Oh,
So yeah, in this is it's amazing, but same with the men. So the men, with a normal hormone status for a man with a right being a right-handed, that first temporal lobe, that territorial conflict would impact on the right side, that male side, and therefore decreases testosterone. The estrogen level is more in relation, and so he becomes a softie, a softie.
yeah, I
So
love that word.
kind of he could be, yeah, yeah. So
Because
he's
who
not the
goes
dominant
around
one.
these days? I think. Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt, but I feel like there's quite a few softies out there these days. Not to say it's
yeah.
putting on the man, but I mean there are. But
But
sheds
this
light
is
on
why.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is why there's just lots of territorial conflicts. And so that would be the right-handed, but for a left-handed man, it's the opposite. So instead of bringing his testosterone levels lower, it'll impact on the female side, lower his estrogen levels because we all have estrogen and testosterone. And so he's even more male now. Now he's like the big shot. He's
Ugh.
gonna be, yeah, coming out in front. He'll often come across as like an alpha, but he's not truly an alpha because there's a conflict within the territorial lobe, but he comes across as the alpha.
Interesting. Okay, and one more thing with that original example where it goes from the left side to the right side, and then so after the second one, the testosterone's coming down, so she's going back to more feminine traits, but she still hasn't resolved that. So it sounds like everything should be just lower in general, but I guess again, relative to the testosterone, it's increased again. Because it feels like in that case, when there's a constellation going on, it sounds like hormones in general are going to be low. Right. So is that what's happening in someone who's like, I've got zero hormones? I'm like, well, I don't think it's possible for you to have zero hormones. It's kind of need those. But is that what's happening in people that are very, very low on the hormonal detector?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is. I guess that would be the explanation is, what's going on in the temporal lobe specifically, or what's going on in with the testicles or the ovaries. We have to look at those places. And the loss, that drop in hormones, we want to be looking primarily at like the territorial loss conflicts for men and the sexual frustration conflicts for women. And
Okay.
then in general, the loss conflicts that would affect the testicles and ovaries. But yeah, complete deficiency of like testosterone would be causing that could be like a double loss conflict where it is a constellation really, but
Mhm.
you've lost it and there's deficiency in both testicles or both ovaries if we're dealing with, because it would be the same for a woman, the same conflict theme of a double loss conflict. And so you're essentially not producing any estrogen or any
Right.
testosterone with that.
Yeah. Interesting. So it's such a different way. And then, so how, in a world where we suppress our symptoms or we think we're supposed to have the same hormonal status all the time at all the ages, or we want to suppress our pregnancies or whatever. So what is birth control doing to that? What is hormone replacement therapy doing to that? What is all this? Because this is obviously getting in the way of the biological program.
Yeah. Yeah. It just allows us to, when we know this, it allows us to look at this whole situation and ask ourselves, like, what is the need for that? Why do we feel the need for hormone replacement therapy? Why do we feel the need to, well, it's obvious why people would go on contraceptives, right? But if you knew this, there's no way in heck you would put yourself on them or put your daughter on them. Not with knowing this, not with knowing the implications of you messing with the hormones without needing to, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's just conditioning. It's just like, what messages are we receiving? What pressure do we feel to be certain way, to do certain things based on, societal norms?
Right. Yeah, societal norms. Okay, interesting. So let's get into some specific examples of our hormonal irregularities because we put hormonal, the word hormonal in front of a lot of things. So say a girl is finally getting her menstruation. So different ages are impacted and some women sail through it. I mentioned last time that I had a very easy time. My whole cycle still having it. It's changed, it's slowly changing, I think now, but it was very easy. I never medicated a single one, where I have a friend who, up until very recently, medicated everyone. It was debilitating. It was painful. So there's pain, there's cramping, there's heavy bleeding, there's this excess bleeding. But then there's women who have, or young girls who have hormonal acne, moodiness. Like some have some symptoms, some have a whole bunch of symptoms. Some get it older, some get it younger. I'm saying like the first period. So what in the German medicine view is normal, like age and experience, and then why would we be left or right of that center?
Right. So for like the normal, quote unquote, normal age, biological age that a young girl would have her first period would be age 11. And so if she doesn't get it by age 11, then we know that there is a territorial conflict involved. There she would have experienced a sexual frustration conflict. That would be the only reason, because it if when we have lower estrogen levels, it makes sense why we wouldn't get our period, right? If we haven't got it yet, there has to be some reason why the estrogen levels are lower, and that would be the reason. Um, and so yeah, that's anytime we experience territorial conflicts, especially the big one. And I say the big one because if you actually look on a chart on this is a picture of the cerebral cortex, and specifically this is the temporal lobe. Okay. And
Oh,
here, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but it's a bigger brain control relay where the cervix uteri and the coronary veins are controlled. And that has to do with the conflict theme of the sexual frustration. So that is like the biggest impact in that temporal lobe that will, wildly impact the levels of the estrogen and testosterone. For the other side, it's that territorial loss conflict, and that's affecting the coronary arteries for on the male side. So, kind of lost my train of thought there, Sasha. What
so
were we
you were
going
saying
with?
what normal is for the age, and then what
Right.
impacts that, and then what's impacting the experience of how they're going through it, and what would bring it on sooner?
Yeah. So the sooner one, it could be that she's a left-handed female,
Okay,
right? Because if she has that sexual frustration conflict, she still perceives as a female, but she's left-handed, so it's impacting the opposite
right,
side, which
okay,
decreases her testosterone, makes
right,
have
okay,
even more estrogen. So
yes,
that would be the earlier onset.
okay.
So, and then for those girls, right, who do experience the territorial, conflict theme within that temporal lobe, well, this is where we start getting the symptoms. We start getting cramps. Like yeah, it's cramping. And what other, like, are there other coinciding conflicts related to sexuality in there? Because that's often common too. Depending on what the conflict would have been, it could have, let's say she was humiliated at school by a boy. That could have been perceived as that, but it also could have had a concurrent conflict that is affecting her, the uterus, where it's an ugly genital, half genital conflict, or a mating conflict, it's called in biological terms. And this just means issues with the opposite sex. So
Mm,
in this case,
right.
yes, there'd be lots of cramping. There'd be lots of, yeah, it will cause symptoms. So for you, Sasha, where it was kind of a breeze and it's still a breeze, this just means that there's just been less temporal lobe constellations or temporal lobe conflicts for you in your experience.
Right.
The rule of thumb, basically, with what has been noticed and kind of recorded, is that the more conflicts you experience as a child in the younger years, the more symptoms you're going to have as you are working your way closer to this age where around 50, your ovaries naturally begin to create less estrogen. And so this is where we get the quote unquote common menopausal symptoms.
Yeah.
And this is because all of what actually happens with the menopause, you know, we'll touch on this in a little bit, but just symptomatically, the reason why all these symptoms come up at that specific time is because the the levels of our estrogen are now lowering, which means it's we have more testosterone in relation to our estrogen, and that means the conflicts that we had perceived and that were active when we were viewing the world as a female, right, through these lenses of biologically female, well, they're no longer relative because now we're not looking through the same lens. We're not looking through that estrogen lens. We're looking through the testosterone lens, through this more male perspection or perspective. And so those conflicts that were active, they now go into healing. And if they aren't going into healing, they're impacting on the opposite side now. And now we've got all these symptoms coming up. So it's just incredible how much our hormones have to do with our symptoms. It's just amazing. But you have to break them down, like break down the symptoms. So I heard you say hormonal acne.
Yeah.
So
Big
this is
one.
one thing where it's a really good example of, okay, we know that, acne isn't caused from hormones because acne, it's the corium skin we're dealing with. And in G&M terms, this is to do with an attack or feeling soiled or disfigured conflict. And so it's controlled from a totally different brain control relay that control doesn't have anything to do with estrogen and testosterone. Nothing. So we have to look at what was the coinciding conflict, and you break it apart. So it's never the hormones to cause it. It's what's that concurrent conflict we're dealing with, and what's the hormone status? Where are we in within the temporal lobe? And you break it apart. You take every symptom and you're like, you just draw out this beautiful picture and you start to see the whole thing very clearly. It's really neat.
So interesting because people will say, well, if it appears, say, on the chin, it's hormonal acne. If it's somewhere else, it's a different kind of acne, right? So it's just interesting because yeah, when you know that a certain part of the brain is controlling a certain part of the body, then it's impossible for
It's
it to be
impossible. And
all related
that's
from one
right.
thing. Yeah,
Right. And with that, like, if it's hormonal acne, that means every woman who is kind of going through that phase would have to experience it because we're talking about like these biological laws, there's no use for statistics. There's no exception to these laws. But in conventional medicine and traditional medicine, we know that it's all based on statistics. So they're saying most people or a lot of people would experience, menopause or hormonal acne, but if not everyone does, then you have to throw it out the window. It doesn't apply.
right.
Anytime there's exceptions, there's another story. And so you always want to go back to the biological laws that you're living under. I mean, it doesn't need statistics.
Right. And
They
it's
just need to be
making me
learned.
think of what's really sad is girls don't even have a chance to work it out. They're getting put on contraceptives so young these days, just for convenience. so that they don't have to deal with their symptoms, so they don't have to, but at what cost? First of all, we're putting something completely unnatural in our body. And second of all, we lose the opportunity to resolve what caused the whole issue in the first place. We're not even delving into that. And who knows how that's going to impact later on. It's just a real disservice to our children to just medicate them right away like that without even consideration for something else, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's the cool thing about this work is once you are aware of it, you begin to make different choices. And
right.
they're really empowering choices after that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about all the symptoms of menopause because again, this is a big time of life where women are grouping all these potential symptoms in one. Lack of sleep, they feel like they're mentally going crazy, they can't handle things, they're getting a ton of belly fat, they can't lose the weight, they're just at the hot flashes. So they seem to all come together at the same time. So let's break that down and see what's actually going on.
Sure. Yeah, it's a really good question. It's important because you're right. There's so many people that are experiencing this, and it's almost like they just expect it because so many women have the same story. It's like, oh, I didn't quite get that symptom, but I got this. Like I got
Right.
this whole whack load. And so, yeah, people
Yeah.
categorize it as this is what you have to go through. But there are some cultures in the world that don't even have a word for menopause because of the there's not very many conflicts within that territorial lobe. And most of those places are tribal communities where they're living very biologically. And so they don't experience the territorial conflicts that we do in our society where when you're 18, you're off, like you're on your own and you got to fend for yourself and you move out. It's just totally different where in in like tribal life or whatever, and for our ancestors, everybody was a part of something bigger and
Yeah.
everyone had a role. And so there was just less exposure to these types of conflicts. But basically all of those symptoms that you kind of mentioned, whether you group them all together, it's all because of those conflicts that were active, that were very relevant from the female, the perception of uh, estrogen, right, from the female perception going into healing. And so that means if there's weight gain, this is a different conflict. If there is acne, that's a different conflict. If whatever the symptom is on its own, these are all conflicts going into resolution because of the change in hormone status. And so it just means that if the more symptoms a person has going through this change, it just means that they simply experience more of those conflicts. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just there's a reason why we have all these symptoms. And so now it's looking at the symptoms. Okay, this doesn't have to be, we don't have to do with this. Like, not everyone is going to have that. And some people might be thinking who haven't yet gone into this age of around 50 to go through this lowering of the estrogen, right? But they might be like, oh my God, I've had so much trauma or so many conflicts. Now, look, I'm going to get like bombarded with all these symptoms. But that's not necessarily the case. You can right now start to look at this as not a time of like fear, but wow, this going through this period in our life it's very, very special. And yes, your estrogen level will decrease, so you will be resolving those conflicts, but you don't have to go through them in the pain because you will know what they're from and you'll be able to make those emotional connections. And that completely changes the game on a symptomatic level where you are not fearful. You know your body's not doing anything wrong. You know you're not deficient of anything. If you just support your body and look through the lens of you are now moving into this state of wisdom and this, it's a whole new chapter that you get to do. You have different responsibilities now because you're not at the childbearing age now, so you can do things that you didn't get a chance to earlier. And so it's a beautiful experience and it changes the game. So yeah, it's really neat. But we can go through these symptoms if you want and kind of learn about the different conflicts involved.
Yes, please. And one thing I know we talked about last time is also I think women are making it worse from themselves as they fear this time of life. I think they fear the change. They're getting old. What are they good for? Their beauty in a world where beauty, whatever we think that is these days, is so high on the totem pole of values. It's a hard time for women. Whereas, I think in more tribal societies, it's a time of recognizing the shift and moving into a wise time, an elder period of your life, and just that it's a beautiful time. I'm super curious. So yes, let's break down those separate symptoms, please.
Okay. So do you want to start with maybe like the belly fat
Sure.
area? Like why does it seem to come here in the belly area even?
Yeah.
So um there's two things that could be going on here, and the most likely thing is, well, that's working together where you have the self-evaluation, because when we're dealing with like fat tissue, right? This is a self-evaluation. It's a light self-evaluation conflict.
Okay.
And in the area of our stomach region and our, where our ovaries are, the childbearing area, right, of our body, well, this is perceived automatically as, oh my God, like I won't be able to ever have children now. If once you lose that, your estrogen is deficient, you don't have that. And so that becomes a conflict in and of itself is, oh my God, this area, like it's never going to be the same. I'm no longer good here. And that would be termed as like a self-evaluation. And then, as you were talking about, Sasha, the fear of moving into this, like, I'm old, I'm getting old now. Like, look at, I'm already going through menopause. This would initiate the kidney collecting tubule program, which holds water. It's a water retention, and that's very biologically meaningful. If you feel like a fish out of water where you're not supported, you're on your own, you feel like you don't belong anymore, you don't have someone that you can lean on, this would be the reason for that program. So the area that's perceived as not good anymore is now running in another conflict with, I'm on my own. How am I going to get through this? I just don't feel supported in this way. And so this is what happens. And it's all to do with perception. That's the most insane part, is because we can write down, if women were to write down, let's say you're going through this menopause, if we're just speaking to people out there, and you notice that, yes, after like you moved into that menopausal time and you notice that you had weight gain. If you were to write down your situation, your life situation without holding anything back, write it down on paper, what was going on, most I like for the most part, there wouldn't be anything unusual other than your perception of what you're making that mean about you. And when
Mm.
you see that, when you bring it to light, it is like game changing, because you see your story now that's been kind of running the entire biological programs. It's all the conflicts are initiated. They have to first be perceived at the level of the psyche, right? Our subconscious mind. That's how it all is initiated in the first place, these biological programs. So if we see what's going on in the psyche by literally writing our story down and what's going on in our life, we get to be like, oh wow, yeah, that's actually, I am safe. I do have people that I can count on. I'm not in any danger. I'm not a fish out of water. And yeah, I might not be able to carry babies anymore, but I am actually moving to the space of liberation now of, yes, I have all this wisdom from a lifelong journey of experiences. And that is wisdom, that is knowledge that you can now share with others. So it's looking at your story that you have going on your head and seeing it from a totally different perception, and that will change everything. You'll drop the weight unbelievably quick. And it's not fat. The weight isn't fat. It's just water retention. You'll just pee it all out, and it doesn't have to take a long time. It's amazing.
What's the biological purpose of the water being held?
Yeah, well, water is life, right? So we have to think of these laws as we want to, it's easier to understand them when we think of them as animals in nature. And so our bodies are hardwired with these primal laws. So we're talking about like when it was like there was fish. They're just fish, right? Just ocean life. And if a fish were to get out of the water, like were to, wash up on the sand, their life was at stake. They literally wouldn't survive. They need the water. Water is their life. And so
Yeah.
what their bodies would do with it, they want to retain all the water they possibly can. So they would be really, really thirsty. And this is what happens to us. We're really, really thirsty when we're conflict active with this program. And we don't urinate very much. Our bodies naturally want to hold on to it because we share these laws. These are very primal laws. And our psyche doesn't differentiate whether we are living in the ocean and got swept off onto the sand, or if we just figuratively perceived our situation like we're a fish out of water, we're like cast out, we're cast aside, and we don't belong. It's the same thing. It's to retain water so that you survive, that you will surely survive.
Interesting. Okay. Okay.
That's why, and for those programs, that kidney collecting tubule program, it's usually never literal. Like it's never like a literal threat that we are cast aside. It's just our perception about it. That's why it's so important to write down,
Yeah.
what you think's going on, and then you get to see it for what it is.
Right.
But
Interesting. Okay. So hot flashes, very common one for women to go through.
yes, hot flashes are just the very quick in and out of conflict activity into healing phase. So there's the second biological law that every special biological program has two phases. It's a conflict active phase, and then once that conflict is resolved, it's a healing phase. So this is the nervous system where you have the fight or flight, the sympathetic phase, and the rest and digest, the parasympathetic. And the conflict active phase, that sympathetic phase, this is when your extremities are cold, right? Because our blood vessels are constricted. Your body's like on, it's made to all engines go, let's get through this conflict. And so we're cold. We're not sleeping, we're not eating. We're just wanting to get the conflict resolved and just survive the conflict. And then when we go into the healing phase, our blood vessels dilate and we become warm. Everything slows down. We eat now, we sleep. And this is where, fever comes in and the body just heats up because of inflammation, everything going on that's opposite of what happened in the conflict active phase as far as tissue adaptation. And so there's different temperatures, right? These parts of the nervous system regulate the temperature as well as the thalamus. And that regulates temperature as well, body temperature. So yes, when we're triggered in and out of conflict activity quickly because of those conflicts that are not relevant anymore, but they're still active, so they have tracks, and we're going in and out of conflict activity, in the temporal lobes. This is what's causing that. Oh, I'm conflict active, I'm cold, and then all of a sudden through the night you get super super hot or something, and this is because you went into healing, like you're sleeping, you have no recollection of the track right through the day, so you're moving into that conflict healing phase.
Right. So a
So
couple of things on this, because so my friend was having crazy amounts of hot flashes, and I had just given her, and she's gone through a lot in the last little while. And then there's just been a lot of things. And then it brought up things from her childhood and all these things. But I got her on Black Hohosh for a while just to help her smooth it out as she's going through some difficult times, which was helping her. However, she's like, it's not working anymore. I'm like, it's not that, it's not, it doesn't rely on Black Hohosh. There's stuff going on. And I found an interview with Andy Lockmears and this other woman all about menopause. I can't remember what it's called. And I sent it to her and she's like, oh my God, thank you so much. I see what happened. I see, because she was good. And then all of a sudden it started coming up again. She started having crazy amount of hot flashes. And this was just a little while ago. And so she's just working through thinking, okay, there's another way to experience this. She was re-perspectiving everything to the point where now she's probably not getting any, or maybe she'll get half of one or something like that. But it was all through seeing it. It was all through seeing it and change. I'm like, it's not, the supplement's not what you need. You need to resolve what was going on. And there was a lot that happened recently that dredged up a whole bunch of other stuff. So super interesting to watch that happen in real life, right in front of my eyes, right?
that
Yes.
is
It's cool.
incredible.
Yeah. So if women would
Yes.
be willing to see that, but sometimes a woman is having hot flashes for 10 years, 15 years. So
But the tracks, because the tracks they're never identified and then really dissolved. It's like they're never being looked at. What's the cause? Like, can you connect it and see it? We don't have to live with those tracks. We don't have to live with them for years and years. It's just, are we willing to, or first of all, do we even know? Can we get the awareness to look for them? What are they? Start writing them down and get familiar. Oh, every time, my husband brings up the subject, I get a hot flash. Well, what is that connection? And
Right.
just see, is it relevant? Like, is it something that you have to still deal with? Most of the time it's not. But that interview you're talking about, I believe it was with Tanya Verquin, and she's the author of Wiser Woman's Guide to Perimenopause and Menopause,
Yes.
if
Yes.
that's the one I'm thinking
Yeah,
of.
I think
So
so. I think so.
that book is a super good resource because Tanya actually knows GNM, and so she's based
Yes.
all of her book on this knowledge as well. So I would highly recommend anyone to get that book who's
I
curious about this, or even if you're postmenopausal and you're like, oh, I actually went through so much, I would love to be able to read and just kind of see if I can correlate anything. So
I-
yeah.
I've sent that link to several women, and a friend of mine's like, every woman should listen to this interview. Like, I know. It just it gives it all back to you, and not finding that solution outside of yourself outside of yourself on a shelf or with a practitioner or anything like that, right? So it's just so exciting that way. And so not hormonally related, but when you're saying someone's conflict active, does that mean anytime, say, your circulation shuts down and you're cold, that you are in a state of some kind of conflict activity?
Yeah, generally you're in a state of you're in a sympathetic state. That's the nervous system state. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you experience a DHS, a conflict shock. In the daytime, our bodies are naturally in that sympathetic phase, right? Because we have to work, we got to communicate, we got to eat, we got to drive, we got to have conversations. And so we're not right now in a vagatonic phase. So yeah, your hands would be colder in a sympathetic phase when you're up and at it through the daytime, right? And then naturally around 5 o'clock in the evening, when the sun's starting to set, your body will naturally shift into that vagatonic state. That's if you're not conflict active with a DHS, with the biological program running,
Right, right,
because then you're in a prolonged state, and that's when you're cold for days or weeks, and
mhm,
you haven't warmed up yet. Well, then that would let you know, okay, yeah, let's figure out what's going on here.
right. And so for people who don't understand vagotonic state, that's just the healing state.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Healing
that's the
phase.
healing phase. That's where most of the symptoms are going to be coming. So when you get fever, when you get pain, inflammation, so-called infections, where we got that beautiful bacteria coming in, the cleanup
Yeah.
crew,
Hmm.
this is all in that vagatonic phase,
Right,
that healing phase.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so last one with women, well, maybe combined, maybe not. So, but often another symptom is not being able to sleep and also feeling like they can't handle anything and they're like flying off the handle. They're just flying off the handle and can't deal with anything over their cup is always full, it seems.
Right. So that lack of concentration, stuff like that. So this is just the different vibrational imbalances within the brain, because we're going to go back to constellations here. We didn't really discuss constellations, but this is where constellations would come in. So just as a quick intro to constellations, we're dealing with specifically the cerebral cortex constellation. So in the temporal lobe, where we have one active conflict in the left cortical hemisphere and then one happening in the right. And so this is behavioral changes. And it all depends on, like, this is where if you had the impact in your brain, so the conflict itself would have been more intense with the right side, you'd be more depressed, right? In a more state of depression. And if it was on the left, you'd be more manic. So this just means more energetic. You're more out there. And the depressed is more of a slower state, a lower state of being. And so in and out of conflict activity, when we're triggered, this is what causes that vibrational changes. The whole behavioral changes that happen with somebody going into a constellation is the the temporal, like the hemispheres, actually shifting vibrations. And so when they're in a state of coherent vibration where both hemispheres are vibrating coherently, you're fine. There's no behavior that's kind of out of the ordinary. You're in a state of peace. But the moment one hemisphere vibrates differently, this puts you into a behavioral change. And so this is moving in and out of those vibrational changes. That's what tracks do when we are dealing with the temporal lobe constellations.
Okay. And so that would show up at that time, say the menopausal time, because again, the perception is changing. There's healing going on.
Yep,
And
yep.
that would
And
bring
then
on,
the tracks are just triggering those ones that aren't quite resolved yet.
right.
So it's triggering in and out of, okay, we're more manic and this track makes you more depressed and you're just going in and out. And that vibrational shift makes
Yeah.
it hard to concentrate, makes it hard for anybody to concentrate.
Right. 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 Okay, folks. So it's not just related to the hormones it's not about cutting out body parts, right? It's not about suppressing symptoms with hormones and things like that. Like I think as women, it's really sad what we've allowed ourselves to buy into is this perception of what we're supposed to look like at all times, how we're supposed to feel, how we're supposed to like just and embracing different roles in different parts of the life cycle. You know, the motherhood, the wise woman, the gray hair, the just it's different times of the life. We just try to, freeze frame, a certain age and just stay there the whole time. But good God, when I look back, it's like, God, who would want to be 20 again? What a stupid, I was so dumb. I just a dumb thing. Like, why would I want, I'm like, I'll take this now over that anytime. And then another, I interviewed the day of take one of this interview, I'd interviewed somebody earlier and we were talking about aging and beauty and fascia and stuff. And she was saying, it's just about loving life more than you love beauty, right? And our idea of what beauty is these days, it's really changed. So I really feel like we're so ready to just go the medical route without looking within and embracing where we're at. So women, it's just an opportunity to learn about yourself and to know yourself a little bit more. And that's why I love these types of interviews where it applies to everyone, no matter who you are. Yes, we're all individuals, and there's certain laws that apply to all of us. There's certain things that apply to all of us, and it's just an opportunity to get to know ourselves more and get more intimate with how this works. So super fun, super fun. Okay, so let's talk about men for a sec before we go on to another one, because I want to talk about like reproductive cancers. So then we know from German medicine, for example, cancer is totally different. But before we do that, let's talk about the men for a little bit, because there's also some hormonal shifts going on in men, but from the lens of GNM, that has its own path. So can you explain that for the men?
Yeah, so it's much later where the men's testosterone levels will naturally start to decrease, and that's around age 75. So yeah, they stay more masculine biologically for a purpose, By the time they reach 75, they in terms if we're talking biologically and we're looking back at our ancestors, men would have been they would have already gotten so much territory, right? They would have land, they would have a lot of kids, they'd have grandchildren, they'd have so many things to protect, to provide, to care for. And so they need that length of time in order to fulfill that. And then by that time, they're 75, all of their young have already grown to be men and now can take the role on for them. So they can now move and step down and become more softer now, softer in nature because they don't need that manic part of them anymore. So it's just a completely different role change, purposefully. It's just so designed perfectly, and it's amazing to see because now, like, have you ever noticed an elderly couple walking down the street and the older man will be behind and the lady, the older woman, will be in front and she'll be taking charge and you'll see the man behind. But if you look at like a couple in their 30s, given that they're you don't have a lot of constellations
Yeah.
happening in that
Yeah.
temporal lobe, the man will be in the front and the
Right.
the woman will be distancing behind. And you can see it's just nature's way. He's there to protect her, care for her, provide. And so he's going to go in front. And then later on, when that man's role the offspring has now taken that role from, not from him, but like he gets to step down. That's an honor thing for him to hand it over to the young. Well, then you see it change where now he's happy to stay behind. He's happy to get told what to do, and he's done enough. This is his time to just provide his wisdom now for his life experiences to the young and guidance in that way. So they're moving into their roles of guidance and being those elders a little bit later because they've got a lot to establish before that. And women are moving into that role of being an elder and a guide a lot sooner. And there's a reason for that too. So just like when you were saying, Sasha, like I wouldn't want to be 20, but that's because you are so much more wise now. Like you have
Hope so.
this amazing life experience under your belt that you can now share to people who haven't yet gone through what you have. And this is the reason why looking at this, having this perception of moving through this change is so exciting because it's just a whole new role and it's like an honor.
It is, and we get to do it, right? I think we need to change how we look at that. But what would you say to people that are saying, well, Tanya, there's hormone disruptors everywhere that's driving high estrogen, it's driving low testosterone, men are hippie and have boobs, and women are all, they're having all these estrogen-driven cancers and things like that. So what would you say to somebody who's going to say, well, that's why this is all happening?
Well, the estrogen driven cancers, like what does that even mean? We have to look at, the terminology that things are getting named and categorized as. If what is a estrogen driven cancer? Like give me an example. Tell me the organ related and we can tell you the conflict related. We can tell you what you've been through. It's not we don't need again statistics. We don't need these labels. We just have to get clear on the organ involved and then relate that to that psychological biological conflict you experienced.
Yeah, and
It
it's
it
really
isn't
too
it
bad with
isn't
that
the
because
estrogen.
yes, I was just going to say because a lot of women are getting on estrogen suppressing medication once they've had a diagnosis, which is then causing a further depletion of very essential nutrition in their body. It's driving out other things, right? When they're messing with the whole system. So, okay, so let's talk about that. Let's go into let's talk about breast cancer. So there's one that we talk about as a hormonal cancer, an estrogen-driven cancer. So that from the lens of German medicine has nothing to do with that. So I know it's left breast, right breast, there's different things there. So what are we talking about in that case?
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's what we have to do. We have to look at the organ involved and we set the hormone status aside for now, okay? And let's just look at the organ. So for breast cancer, there's two types of breast cancer because there's different tissues within the breast that are controlled from different brain relays. So you have to be sure, is it an intraductal breast cancer? And if it is, that's controlled from the cerebral cortex, and that's a separation conflict. It's when someone perceives like a loved one torn from their breast. So a separation of a person or a loved one or a pet. And it would be right or left depending on her handedness. Nothing to do with estrogen, nothing to do with hormone status in this case. It's just, is she right-handed? Is she left-handed? If she
Oh,
has an intraductal, yeah,
I'm going to ask also now, but is that also going to depend on if it's a mother-child conflict or anybody else conflict?
that's where our handedness comes in.
Yeah.
So if
Okay.
she's right-handed, and let's say her breast cancer is on her right breast, this would be partner related. So partner doesn't mean, oh, it has to be your significant other. It literally is anybody other than your mother or child.
Right. Okay.
And the left side would be mother-child related. So if she had an intraductal breast cancer diagnosis in her left breast and she was right-handed, it would be we want to look, okay, what was that separation conflict perceived to do with either your mother or child or children? And you can put pets in here too, because a lot of people perceive their animals as
Yeah.
their children. So so that's one type of breast cancer. Okay. Then we have the glandular breast cancer. And this, again, we're not dealing with cerebral cortex, we're dealing with this cerebellum here. And this has to do with either a nest worry, so worry within the nest. Think of what, in biological terms, what a nest is. It's where your loved ones, where your young is, where your family is. So if there's any perceived conflict within worry about that or arguments within that nest, within that space, right? Then this is where we would have the breast glands start to change, have an adaptation. And again, but handedness, yes, handedness still applies for this. So right-handed, if you have the right breast happening, you know it's partner related. So it could be sibling, it could be aunt, it could be friend, yes, husband, work colleague, anybody other than a mother or child. And for the left-handers, it's the opposite. So your left side would be the partner side. Your right side would be mother-child side. So we have to look at in terms of that. But again, none of these tissues have to do, they don't regulate hormone status. None of those. So the breast cancer, whether it's intraductal or glandular, they have nothing to do with your hormone status. So that's why we have to separate that. That's why these laws, there's no exception. We want to be looking at through the lens of these laws because then there's no question. And if the hormone status is deficient somewhere, then you're looking at a different conflict, separate from what's going on now. Those conflicts could have to do with each other. It could have been experienced at the same time you had the nest worry conflict, right? You could have had something else going on too that would be impacting if it's, with the um like the cervix involved, that would be the sexual frustration conflict. So something could have happened in alongside that one conflict. We can perceive conflicts in multitude of ways, which would mean that we have multiple organs and tissues involved. But it doesn't mean that one's causing the other. These organs are, again, they're controlled from different brain control relays and totally different embryonic tissue layers. That's why we can't say that one thing causes the other. It's perception of conflicts.
Right. And so, folks, when she says embryonic tissue layers, this is what this is all based in. It's a very scientific basis. This is not somebody that just observed something and, oh, that's how it started, but it's very scientific and it's based in embryology. So really, really fascinating. But what makes me think now, when you of say PMS symptoms and breast swelling, what's going on when you have tender breasts around your period?
Yeah, so it's the same thing. There would have been a conflict in healing because swelling happens in the healing phase. So we've got the edema there. We got a edema at the level of the brain, and same with the correspondent organ. And edema just means a pocket of water there to protect the healing tissues. That's all it is. It's not a cancer, a tumor, or anything like that. It's just a healing phase. So you'll have tenderness, redness, swelling. That's always a healing phase. That's never going to be something that you're in a conflict active phase with. So when you see that, you're like, "Ooh, I've healed something." So being the breast, let's connect those conflict content. What was the emotional conflict that you experienced related to the breast, right? We're talking about the nest worry conflicts, argument conflicts, or the separation conflicts. So it's not directly tied to the hormone status. We just have to look at what are the symptoms, what's the organ involved, and what is the corresponding content like around the conflict.
But in this case, what I'm wondering is that because it's very regular for women monthly, but it's both, right? It's not just one side that gets swollen and sore. It's both tenderness and swelling in both. But it's like some women increase a couple cup sizes every month. So,
Right. And so that would just mean that it's related to more than one person. It could be the family as a whole, the family as a group. So yes, it would have mother children involved
yeah.
and it would have partner involved. So it's
Okay.
more than just one person. It's often a family unit. And I've seen this too in clients. It's the family unit. There's issues and an unresolved, like the conflict will go into healing, which happens, that's why we have the symptoms, but then a trigger, they've got tracks involved that put them back into a conflict active phase. And so this is where you're going to want to get clear on your picture. What's the story? Write it down. Let's figure out what's going on in the head, and then we'll be able to see your picture, and we'll link it up with the timeline of what happened. How long has this been going on? And then let's look back. What was the thing that happened that's concerning your entire family, your loved ones, your nest
Right.
members.
So what about things like, again, hormonally driven cancers? We've got uterine cancer, cervical cancer, ovarian cancer. What's going on in
Yeah,
these cases?
yeah. The uterus involved with like procreation conflict, right? This is the organ that literally holds the fetus, the baby. So we have to think, what's the biological purpose of the organ? This is how, when I was first learning, it made it the easiest for me to figure out what the biological conflict was. Is if you look at the organ, ask yourself, what's the purpose of that organ? So with the uterus, the purpose is to hold the fetus. So the conflict has to do with being able to has to have something to do with pregnancy, right?
Yeah.
So that's the conflict content is okay, where was that procreation conflict? Was it that you lost a child? Was it that you can't get pregnant for whatever reason? Is it because you can't really trust your man? Like there's going to be something around the inability to successfully uh, conceive. Now, it doesn't have to be that because even women postmenopausal can experience a conflict with the uterus. It could be perceived as their daughter being unable to get pregnant and she really wants her daughter to have babies. Like we all just we have to open our eyes to the different ways people can subjectively perceive conflicts because how we might perceive a conflict is totally different than somebody else. So we have to expand the umbrella. But if you have an idea of what the biological function and purpose is of that organ, you get a pretty good idea of what that biological conflict's linked to. So that would be the uterus. And again, the cancer when we often get diagnosed is already when they're healing anyway. They're already healed. The conflict's healed, the symptoms are coming, and now you get this crazy cancer diagnosis that could be the result of another DHS where you start another biological program. But yeah, so symptoms with that would just already be saying, you know what, you're already healed, the conflict's resolved, and this tumor now is just being broken down naturally by the tubercular bacteria in your body, causing the night sweats, causing the pain, the inflammation, all that discomfort. You, when you have night sweats, this is a time to celebrate because you know you've just resolved a conflict that is, has to do with basic needs. This is endodermal tissue. This is the yellow group if you're familiar with the G&M colors in the chart. And it's all about basic needs, reproductive needs, like breathing, eating, and yeah, those are the basic needs. So night sweats are a great sign. It lets us know that you also have the tubercular bacteria, which is lovely. We need that.
Yeah.
So cervical cancer would be the sexual frustration conflict. That would be part of the temporal lobe where the
Okay.
cervix is involved. And so we talked about that a little bit about examples, but a father walking out on the family, being ridiculed in front of people by a boy you liked, or seeing your boyfriend with another girl, anything like that, right? So that would be the cervical cancer related. What other cancer did you mention?
Ovarian.
Ovaries,
Yeah.
that is with the loss. So this is a loss conflict and loss of a loved one. We're not talking about a loss of a truck or a home. It's a
Mm.
loved one. It's a living being.
Okay. Okay. Okay, folks. So that's a totally different way of looking at all of these things that we seem to all lump together. And then there's one solution in the medical field, right? And it's very harmful. So then we pump ourselves with all these other things, and then we don't even gain insight into our own life and the opportunity to heal that on a totally different level. So, okay, so you mentioned not that a conflict of not being able to get pregnant, but I would think the inability to get pregnant is going to be a result of a prior conflict that changed your hormonal status, like the whole idea of fertility.
Hmm. Yeah, and it often is. Yeah. Yeah, oftentimes when if you can't get pregnant or someone can't get pregnant, it's because they are running the sexual frustration program where the estrogen levels
Right.
are lower and they just simply cannot conceive.
Right.
That would be one reason why. Or they've maybe it's even about like, oh, um, it runs in my family that I can't conceive because my mom had a hard time conceiving and then her aunt had a hard time. So if you have that story already playing out, that also has a lot to do with this because it's it's not like things run in our family genetically for looks, yes, but as far as like so-called disease and conditions, it's what's getting passed down is the perception. It's
Yes.
the way we perceive the world, and we often perceive conflicts the same way we do our mom and her mom. It's just passed down. It's all conditioning, and it's based on values. It's based on beliefs. It's based on so many individual things that have been passed from one generation to the next.
Yeah. Yeah. That subconscious running the show and people coming into and running programs of prior generations, right? Or even patterns, like physical patterns, creating the same types of experiences to the family. Like, for example, like even like when you go into more, dark areas of like sexual abuse and things like that, that's often a pattern that keeps repeating itself, even from abuse to abusers kind of thing. So, or abusers to abuse kind of thing. So, yeah, so that's what I say. People are like, well, my mom and this, and I'm like, okay, well, okay, that's interesting, but you're not a victim of the genes of your mother or your grandmother. However, there are patterns that have been passed and perceptions that have passed, right? So, life experiences that might be shared, things like that. So, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so you had said something interesting last time. I want to bring it up is like, because you said about an ovarian cyst and that what is the view of an ovarian cyst from GNM?
Yeah, the ovarian cyst is like a gift in terms of when we're looking at it through the lens and understanding it from the lens of the biological laws of nature. That the cyst is actually there in the healing phase. So again, we're talking about your body's already restoring, doing everything it needs to, and the cyst actually is the whole function of that is to provide even more estrogen than you had before you experienced a loss conflict. And so it really is, it's a gift from nature. Estrogen is what keeps people looking physically young, right?
Mhm.
Estrogen is what allows you as a female to feel more feminine. It's what allows you to attract mates. It just is everything. It keeps your skin. It's what produces like the what's that word I'm looking for in the skin?
Like
The
elasticity or
collagen. It's
collagen.
what it
Okay, yeah, it's
yeah, it
related to
helps with
your,
the
yeah,
collagen.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's really a gift from nature. So if you've survived a loss conflict, you are rewarded with this extra estrogen. And that is always only produced by that cyst, that ovarian cyst. And so often women who have ovarian cysts they will experience menopause later, often a year or two later, depending on how much estrogen that cyst is producing. So that would be the reason why someone wouldn't go through menopause at that age of 50 or 51. It's like, oh, but I'm 52 or 53.
Yeah.
Well, let's have a look. Like it would be interesting to see what that extra estrogen is, where is it coming from? And the ovarian cyst is what it is. And this also happens for men in the same way. It would be a testicular cyst. So it's also biologically meaningful that it's producing more testosterone so that if he did lose his offspring, right, whether it was literally or perceived, that he's just stronger. He's going to attract the female. He's going to be able to much easier replace that offspring by the extra testosterone that he has.
And the whole origin of this body of knowledge in the first place, right? Testicular cancer, Dr. Hammer. So interesting. So I
Yes.
think a lot of one might say though, I have an ovarian cyst or had one and it was very painful and it kept on growing and it became a problem. So I just had one
Yeah.
woman who I was just talking to the other day and she was saying her daughter had one, but then it got and it burst, but she hasn't had it since. So I'm like, to me, it sounds like it needed to go through a life cycle and then resolve because it's not coming back. So what about in the case where it's becoming problematic and it's painful or it's getting too large?
And that can happen. Our cyst, it's so fascinating, but the cyst actually takes 9 months to form, just like a pregnancy. It's just incredible.
Oh,
So the
interesting.
9 months, um, if it does get really big, that means there's swelling involved. There's lots of swelling involved, right? And so this is extreme healing. The healing phase is very proportionate in intensity and degree as the conflict active phase was. So if the conflict active phase was, completely traumatic and long and intense, well, then we're going to experience a little bit more intense symptoms. And so, yes, they can become quite big where they are causing issues where it
Mhm.
actually looks like you might be expecting, and it's painful. And in this case, you want to weigh out, okay, what is the my what's the ease? Like what would be make my life better? Is it would it be to remove it? And okay, then I don't have that extra estrogen, but I still will, my ovaries will still be producing estrogen, right? So you could get it removed if it's causing havoc. We want to talk about the value of life we're living, and you can weigh out the options. But there's nothing wrong with having the cyst removed after 9 months. If it's before 9 months, this is where, okay, you
Okay.
can, it can come again. And if it
Wow.
bursts, then we can have other, this is often what happens when it bursts too. If it's too much swelling, or if it's been, when they remove it, it was nicked and it bursts, or yes. And then it'll still be producing estrogen in those little fragments that are left around, but it does cause pain. So there's a lot of case studies of Dr. Hammers and of Helmut Pilhars where the women that they knew who had ovarian cysts, some of them were completely fine. They had nothing other than, discomfort when it was healing in the healing phase, but no issues after. And then some of them, they did need it removed because it was just causing havoc. So it's very individual. It's up to them, up to the individual. And there's no right or wrong thing to do. It's just, what's your quality of life?
Well, and I like that you say that. What is the quality of life? Because that's even though we probably could do whatever to heal, what is the quality of life? How long is that going to take? So I like that consideration because we can get very militant in certain things, right? If you believe in the body and you trust it and you want, which I fully do, but sometimes there is an answer that can be more helpful that might not be the way that you want to go naturally, right? Get that.
Yeah, yeah, there's nothing wrong with, sometimes, and Dr. Hammer said too, surgery, sometimes there's no getting around it. Sometimes you just need it. And not to make that wrong. It's
Yeah,
yes, you really want to be looking at the quality of life when you make those decisions. And
right.
but understanding the whole purpose why it would be causing a problem in the beginning so that you have the full picture. It's not like you're getting the surgery because you believe your body's done something wrong. It's coming it from it knowing that it's done something right, but it's causing some
Yeah,
issues. Like
yeah,
when we have like a tumor within the colon and it's
yeah.
now obstructing, this becomes an issue, and this has to be dealt with in a non-biological way, but it's the quality of life that we need to be looking at.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so say we have a woman, she's in her mid-30s. She's having a hell of a time with her period every month. She's dreading it. She's missing a couple days of work. She's in so much pain. It's just uncomfortable. It lasts forever. What would be some guidance that you would give to somebody in that state? Because there's a lot of women dealing with that.
Yeah, for sure. I always first go to like the curiosity part. So if you know that it's always going to be the pain, all the symptoms are going to be related to a conflict, the first question is like, wonder if I can make that emotional correlation. So if it's always been an issue, if there's always been painful, it's just been hell, how long, get the timeline, and then really try to connect the dots. You don't have to remember the very specific conflict, but just know that your body has been responding because of that initial conflict, and because it's still going on. That means you're still viewing and perceiving your life the way you did when it first started. And that could have been like as an 11, like your first period, or a 12-year-old girl who got it a year late because she experienced that sexual frustration conflict. And it was really detrimental. And she never took the time because she just didn't have the awareness to, because we're not being taught this, to look and make that emotional correlation. And so all these years later, that perceived conflict is still a threat to the subconscious mind, when reality, that person could be long gone by now and completely out of her life,
Right.
whoever, whatever that conflict was. So for me, it's always like, let's connect the emotional correlation. Like, let's make that connection. and realize your body's not doing anything wrong. It's just responding to your subconscious mind. And then we start getting clear. Okay, it's good. How can we look at what the past a little bit differently, and just see it as we're not the same people anymore. We're totally different people.
And I did mention this story last time in the first recording or non-recording. My friend's daughter, who had always had a lot of cramping and things like that, two big things changed in her life. One was dissolving a relationship about the same time, and shortly after that, having a really big talk with her father and airing things out with her father and resolving that. And then she notices the next time it's like, oh, I didn't get cramps. She just didn't associate the two, but her mom told me about it. I'm like, well, isn't that interesting? Look at the timing and look what just happened. So I'm thinking it's probably the father thing. I don't know, but there was some really significant changes in her life and airing things out in resolution, and then all of a sudden it's gone. Like she just had a normal cycle. So yeah. And you don't have
It's
to do
pretty neat.
anything, right? Like the body just takes care of it after that. But
Yes.
the thing is also sometimes the problem is we label the disease the healing symptom, and then we go and suppress what's being healed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then,
And that'll come as people's awareness open up to these laws that we're living under. The more they learn, the more they understand, oh, it's not actually a disease, these are, these quote unquote diseases are just they're adaptations that are helping you cope. And like you said, most of the time the healing, like the symptoms are already the healing phase. So it is just a totally different way to view our bodies and the symptoms that come with being a human.
does anything ever just happen in the brain? Because what about somebody who's dealing with brain cancer or brain swelling or brain something? Is there something we're just not paying attention to in the rest of the body? Or
Yeah,
why
this
the
it's
brain?
never just one thing. It's the psyche, the brain, and the organ is
Yeah,
one unit. You can't
yeah.
separate them. So what happens in the brain, because the brain, it's the control center, there has to be a corresponding organ or tissue.
Hmm.
So it's never just the brain. Something's not happening just solely in the brain. It's happening within the level of the psyche and an organ too. So yes, this is where our awareness, because we know this body of work, this is where we get to move up into this, really take like a lot of responsibility and look at the awareness of what's going on cyclic. Am I losing sleep over this? Is have I not been eating lately? Have I kind of been irritable and my blood pressure's kind of up? Well, what's going on? Like what is that emotional conflict? What's going on? Because there will be tissue adaptation happening, whether you know it or not. In the conflict active phase, for most programs, not all, but for most programs, you don't notice tissue adaptation. There's no symptoms, right?
Yeah.
It's like if we're dealing with it, we have two different sensitivity patterns within the skin. And one of them is called the outer skin pattern, which when you are, for example, like if we have a stink conflict, like an annoyance conflict, well, our mucosa in the nasal passageway will be ulcerating, but we will never know this. We'll have no idea this is happening. When we do notice it is when the stink conflict's resolved and now we're completely congested, we're sneezing, it's painful, we got a headache. Well, that's because it can't just be the brain. It can't be just an annoyance if it caught you off guard, right? It has the three criteria. It has to be doing something to the tissues too. And so, yeah, it's just a matter of how aware can we get about what's going on in the psyche.
Yeah.
What is our state of being?
Right. I just makes me think when somebody's diagnosed with brain cancer and it seems to be the brain, it seems to be so brain centric. I mean, they seem to say that they'll have symptoms based because it's impeding on areas in the brain, but it just seems to be brain cancer, not nothing in the body. But there must be.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering
Yeah,
what. Yeah.
there must be. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
there must
Interesting.
be.
Interesting. Oh, I just had another thing pop up and I forgot what I was going to say before we wrap it up. Um, ow. Oh well, that's okay. That's okay. So No, it's just something. It's on the tip. Okay, that's okay. So let's just start to wrap it up. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate this. And I hope, listeners, that you are realizing that there's so much more to the symptoms that you are experiencing. And don't blame your body. It's happening for a reason. And it's giving you opportunities and giving you insight into how we can resolve things. And sometimes people don't want to look. That's the thing. They don't necessarily want to look, and it's easier to just suppress. But there's always going to be a cost to that if we keep applying poison to our body or injecting poison in our body or something like that. I think there's going to be other undesirable costs, but sometimes you have to do what's going to give you a better quality of life, as Tanya said as well. So I think that's a really important consideration as well. So Tanya, do you have any final words around hormones and GNM and anything? What's your final words for our audience?
Well, you wrapped it up really nicely there, Sasha. Really good overview there. But in general, it's just like ask different questions instead of having that fear and what's wrong with my body. Just begin to start asking different questions of, well, what have I been through lately? What has kind of been a relief for me lately? What have I been totally obsessively compulsive talking about lately? And if I have symptoms, I must have had relief over something. So just start asking different questions and get curious and know that your body can be trusted. It really can. It's never, it could never do anything to harm us. It just can't. We're wired for survival. We're wired for um, survival of the species. So we have to, yeah, looking at our bodies and symptoms from that perspective is it just helps eliminate the fear, or at least bring down the fear a few notches.
Right. I know what I was going to say, because I was mentioning a story last week also about a woman that was diagnosed with breast cancer. She died recently, but she spent so much time doing all these natural things all day, trying to get through it. But as we talked about, the breast tissue is not, we can remove it and still survive. So it's not something that's keeping you alive. So when somebody says, well, it is dangerous and it's going to harm you, what's happening in a case where somebody supposedly died of breast cancer?
Yeah. So you want to see, was that person were they on radiation or chemotherapy? First of all, we want to look at that. Were they getting treatments? Because that's just pure poison going into the system, going into your body. And what that does is it drains the body of the energy. The body needs energy to function biologically. That means in order to restore tissues, to replenish tissues, it needs the energy. So if we're injecting, having chemotherapy, we're literally dismantling the biological ability of the body.
Right.
So that's one thing. So a person doesn't die, and I'm saying this in a very loving way because I know people believe that, yes, I lost my mother from breast cancer, or you know, we all know people who have died from this quote unquote cancer, but
Yes.
the other factors are at play. Maybe it was the chemo, right? That
This
is
one wasn't. There
definitely,
was no chemo radiation in this case.
oh, okay. So when we narrow out that, then we have to look at coinciding conflict shocks, other biological programs that are in a conflict active phase. So this is what often happens is when you go in and you get a diagnosis, any type of cancer diagnosis, cancer in the mind, it's conditioned in our mind to be a death sentence, whether it's a breast cancer, whether it's skin cancer, even for things that are not vital organs, it's just conditioned to be a death sentence. And so with that diagnosis, it's unexpected, it catches us off guard. It's emotionally dramatic, and it's isolated. We're all alone. We're getting this news. And so what do those three criteria mean? It means another DHS, a conflict shock, which initiates a whole nother biological program. And often our diagnoses are perceived as death threats. So this would impact the lungs and the lung alveoli. This is now we're talking about an organ that we need. It's a vital organ.
Yeah.
So when we're dealing with this and we're in a conflict active phase, if it's an extended amount of time, we have a lot of tissue adaptation happening within the lungs. And think of when our body, we talked about this being in that sympathetic phase where you're not eating, or very little you're eating, you're not sleeping, you're not resting lots, you're completely obsessively talking about and worried about the situation, your body's on like full blast. You've got those stress hormones running. It's full tilt, full on for however long it is that you are conflict active for. And
Right.
that drains the body's ability to again heal. So
Yeah.
when that woman or any woman has a breast cancer diagnosis, most of the time she's healing already. So her body can't continue to heal at that capacity efficiently when she's got such a big death fright program running that is just not allowing her body to heal in the way she needs. So we can be depleted from um, more and more conflict DHSs, more and more biological
Mm.
programs. And that's what wears out the body. That's what will lead to death in most cases.
Right. Yeah. One thing
And
after
and the
another.
fear too, Sasha. We can't leave out the fear itself. So yes, we have that death rate conflict, then that active program running, but then it's the coincident fear on top of that. It's it's everybody around who mean well, but they just kind of add fuel to the fire by just their outlook for your life. It's like everybody just everyone's outlook. It has so much energy is everything. And when we have people that are just fearful and worried for you, you pick up on that too.
Definitely.
It's nothing that we can just kind of let it go,
Yeah.
wash it off. No, it's very impactful. So
Absolutely.
there's more going on than the breast cancer.
For sure. For sure. Okay. And I just wanted to comment on one thing because there was, I don't know, about a year ago or something, I would wake up. It happened for maybe about a week. And in the middle, I was so, like I had a pool in my chest here. I was soaked. And it's fun to think about this because I'm like, because otherwise I'd be thinking, oh my God, this is disgusting. I've got to get like I was soaked. It's like I couldn't figure out what I was healing. I don't know what it was, but I didn't care. I was just like, oh good. Something needed to be healed and be healed. But you made a point. You made a comment, and a lot of people would be like, well, what the hell did she mean by that? Where you said, oh great, you have the tubercular bacteria to do the healing. And so we associate tubercular bacteria with illness and disease and problems, but this is a really important bacteria that we need to have in our body. And living in a world where we're so sterile and we sanitize everything, we run the risk of not having these microbial helpers to do the healing, right? Which can also impact the capacity of our bodies to heal in these age where they're to blame for the problem, so we think, rather than being the answer. So just want to bring that up. But it was interesting because knowing this, again, total shift in how I'm perceiving what my body's going through. I'm like, okay, well, just bring it on, whatever it is. I guess I got to get up and change in the middle of the night, but that's what I'm just going to have to do. But man, it could be intense. It can be super intense. But I knew that wasn't menopause. For me, I just knew that wasn't menopause. It just didn't, it was just I just knew it was some kind of healing, but I didn't know what it was. But just opens up the
Yes, that's
mind.
right. And that brings up a good point too, Sasha. The hot flashes are different than night sweats. So
Okay.
that it you have to differentiate between them. So that's right. You were right with, okay, I know this is not a hot flash. It's if you're wet, that's a night sweat. Hot flashes, you don't get wet. You get hot, right?
Right.
There's this
Okay.
heat that overtakes you, but with night sweats, you are wet. And you're not usually hot with night sweats. You're actually kind of cold because you're wet. So it's yeah, that the night sweats are definitely something to celebrate because again, like you said, you've got that tubercular bacteria.
Yeah. So interesting. Isn't that interesting, folks? Isn't this amazing? Okay, well, I think that's good. I mean, there's probably lots we can cover more, and I'm sure there's lots of questions out there. But guys, the major message is just get curious and look into it and see how this is informing you of your life and how your body is working for you, and treat it as an ally rather than an enemy. I think in a world where we are, in order to avoid breast cancer, we are removing breasts, before they're even expressing any kind of cancerous symptoms. I think that's a really sad state of affairs when we are voluntarily removing body parts that are there to support us. And it's interesting because Danny Carroll in our interview is saying, it's the cancer's not in the body, it's in the brain. The body's the vessel that is expressing it. and you can still get things even though you remove the tissue. So it's a fascinating world. So folks, please share, subscribe, share with your family and friends. Like, this is such important information we live in a time where it's more important than ever before to take control of our health, to not make decisions out of fear. Too much of that going on. To take control of raising our children and stop medicating our children the way we are, like over medicating them and suppressing every little symptom that they have because we don't understand what's going on. We don't understand they have a fever for it's part of their healing, or the cold, or the eczema, right? Anything like that. So it's a super empowering way to go through life. And I had interviewed, if you haven't listened to it, with Rick Kohat, who's Tanya's brother, and how GNM is even applied on the farm with the animals, with the land, right? This applies to all of nature, not just us. So it's definitely a big area to study if you choose to do there. But even having just that surface understanding, I think, can allay a lot of fears and help you get through some seemingly difficult times with a more level head. So, hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, be well. Thank you, Jen.